Welcome to this broadcast on Diamyd Medical's news on Friday the 16th that they have received or granted a Fast Track designation from the FDA in the USA. This regards the candidate Diamyd. To put some color and insight to this, we are honored to present CEO Ulf Hannelius and board member Karin Rosén. So I'll start off saying hello and welcome to you, Ulf.
Thank you so much.
Great news, obviously. Let's go at it. You were granted a Fast Track designation. What does it mean and how common is this?
So Fast Track designation, that's a special status that the FDA can grant to both drugs or biologics. And in this case, Fast Track is intended for treatments that focus on serious disease. That's one of the criteria. And in this case, we are focusing on type 1 diabetes and specifically patients that are newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in order to slow down their disease progression. So that's, first of all, that's recognized as a serious disease, which is very important that the FDA sees this as a serious disease. And the second criteria is that it's a treatment that is serving a specific unmet medical need, that there is an identified unmet medical need, and that this specific treatment, and in this case our immunotherapeutic, is focusing on that one. So in this case, so we applied for it, and where we sent in both our rationale as well as our data that the FDA has looked at, and they then granted this special status to us. And the most important thing here from the FDA perspective is that in this case that patients can get access to these kinds of treatments as fast as possible, and that we are then on this kind of a fast track path now where the FDA will give us certain benefits.
And so if I address Karin, then what benefits will this Fast Track provide?
So as you heard Ulf mention here, it's really to make sure that patients in need can get access to an important medicine, which in this case is for type 1 diabetes. From a market perspective, which obviously is also very important, is that the time to submission, it will also be shortened. That means you probably are more likely to get a faster approval if everything goes well in the process. So that's also very important from a sort of commercial perspective.
And also you told me something about interactions, and could you describe what other advantages you will get in the process?
So there are obviously first of all, from a practical perspective, you will be able to have more interaction with the FDA, both written interactions with, for example, specific questions about biomarkers or study setup, and also meetings with the FDA. And especially the point here is that the FDA has identified this treatment as something important, and that they are there really to help make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible in order to make sure that patients get access to this as fast as possible. And on top of that, if you have Fast Track, you can potentially get what's called priority review, which means that when it's time to file the biologics licensing application, the normal average time for the FDA to process these and review these kinds of applications is around 10 months. But with priority review, it can take on average around 6 months. So you win 4 months because you get sort of ahead of the queue then in the review process. And the second potential benefit is to get rolling review, which means that you don't have to wait until you have the full application package in place, which means that the preclinical module, clinical module, manufacturing module, that you can, with rolling review, you can start sending parts of your application to the FDA to get feedback on a rolling basis, which also can potentially speed up your time to market. These are the most important ones. And as part of this as well, you could potentially accelerated approval, which means that the FDA could first give you accelerated approval based on the clinical data, and if anything needs to be sort of you need to follow up patients for a longer time or show efficacy on certain other effect parameters, that's something you can then complement with afterwards. So all of these things are potential parts of the Fast Track designation.
And if I was to ask you to put it, the whole thing in more of a context, but maybe first, since Karin is new to the audience in Sweden, could you please present yourself with your various competences and what you contribute with in this process?
Sure, thank you thanks for asking. So I'm trained at Lund University in Sweden. I have an MD Ph.D degree from there, but I've spent the last 25 years here in the Bay Area in California. And I've been working at various different types of companies, biotech, pharmaceuticals, both small companies as well as very large ones. And I've had the opportunity to both sort of be on the development side, so that means develop drugs, but also marketed and commercialized several products here in the US market. And I'm also very interested and have a great passion for medicines in where there's truly an unmet medical need. And we know for a fact that there's a great interest right now in developing new innovative products for type 1 diabetes because the previous treatments available are not sufficient. And so it's a great honor to be part of the board of Diamyd to help them develop and hopefully launch a new product on the US market.
Karin, I'm sure Diamyd is proud to have you on the board as well. So if we move back to the process, will this mean you get less regulatory risk?
Well, since you have a special status from the FDA, that's like an external validation of what we are doing, that we could say one of the, or maybe the most important regulatory body in the world has said that we are developing something for a serious disease with unmet medical need, where our data currently is supporting that we are actually having the effect intended to treat this patient population. So that's very important, and obviously it reduces the regulatory risk for external parties, that they can see, both investors and potential partners, that we have Fast Track. And since before, in 2010 we received orphan designation, which is another kind of special status when you are treating a patient population that is small enough, but that's why it's also prioritized, and you get certain benefits from the FDA as well when you do this. And now we have Fast Track, so that's important. And this is one, let's say, showing, if we take the US focus, we have a great US focus, both from it's a huge unmet medical need and it's a huge country, but also commercially maybe the most important in the whole world, that we received Fast Track now, and a bit less than a year ago we started the collaboration with JRF, which is the largest patient organization in the US. So that's also an external confirmation of what we are doing, and that there's a huge big patient need, and they are willing to help us go all the way to market. And that we have the study now ongoing in the US with more clinics coming online, and we did the market research as well that we published beginning of this year, again focusing on US, which I think, Karin is the expert really on the pricing and everything in the US, which we can go into, but this is like everything is sort of fits into what we are now delivering when it comes from the US focus, and it's very important.
Okay, and so how is the study going with the recruitment of patients, etc.?
Exactly. So we have, again, for those who don't have all the details, so we are now in phase 3. We have a single pivotal trial, phase 3 trial, which is ongoing in Europe and in the US, 8 European countries, and the US also started now last year, where we have more clinics coming online. Currently, we have around 50 clinics in total, and we will be up to around 60 clinics when we have all clinics ongoing here. And we are recruiting patients between the age of 12 and to 29 newly diagnosed with this type 1. And the specific and really exciting thing is that we identified the responder group based on our previous clinical trials. We have done both retrospective analysis and then prospectively confirmed it in a phase 2, where we focus on a specific genetic subgroup. Around 40% of all newly diagnosed type 1s have the right genetics to fit the profile, where we see that you have a high likelihood of responding to our treatment. And that's really the first phase 3 precision medicine phase 3 trial ever done in this field that we are now doing. And the aim is to have the phase 3 trial fully recruited this year, and then there is a 2-year follow-up on the patients. So given the recruitment goals, we then have the results towards the end of 2026.
Yeah. Okay, and so Karin, could you please walk us through the marketing research that you did in the US when it comes to pricing and willingness to subscribe Diamyd?
Yes, absolutely. So as mentioned, the US market is by far the largest market, especially for specialty drug and biotech. And for most companies, the revenues from the world, then I would say the US market for most companies represent between 85 to 90% of their revenues. So that's how important this market is. However, when it comes to pricing, it is not sufficient to get an FDA approval for this market. It really means that the payers, and in the United States there are thousands of payers. That means the ones who are actually going to reimburse for this kind of treatment. So Diamyd did a market research that was actually press release the first day of JP Morgan, which is the large healthcare conference every year in San Francisco, and where it was concluded that there was interviews with a number of very big payers. These payers represent maybe 50 to 100 million lives, so they are very critical, and they have a lot of experience about reimbursing for drugs. And this market research, it was confirmed by the people that were interviewed that the price tag for a product like Diamyd in this US market could be as high as $200,000 per patient. That means the treatment for one patient. That's a high price, but that's the kind of price you can get if everything goes well with your clinical research, you have the outcome that you expect. But also because of what Ulf mentioned, it's an orphan designation. That means it's a smaller patient population, and also because in this case it's a precision medicine. The patient population that is included in the phase 3 trial are patients that have a specific genotype, and they can be tested because test is actually broadly available. That means that there's a higher likelihood that these patients who will actually potentially get treated with this drug will actually be a responder. And these are all really important components for a payer to know, that they are not going to start treating a large number of patients that will not respond. So back again, this is a very good sort of indicator of at which price this drug could potentially be launched in the United States. So I also think in this market research, and this is also important apart from the payer perspective, also potential prescribers were interviewed. So radiologists, endocrinologists, and other types of physicians. And it was concluded that there was a great interest among them for a treatment like Diamyd. So all of this is very important information when you prepare for a potential launch in the United States.
For explaining this in such an understandable way. After this information on Friday, what are the next steps?
Well, next steps, obviously, it's operationally we are focusing now a lot on the patient recruitment, and that's something that is ongoing and that we are putting a lot of effort into, both in Europe and in the US. And that's important. In the study, as many, I think, viewers know, we will have an interim analysis in July, where it's a blinded analysis, but where there will be a blinded kind of efficacy assessment of the most important endpoint, which is C-peptide, which measures the endogenous insulin production. That's really the marker that shows that we are doing something like disease modification. We are changing disease at the core. And that will be for around 70 to 80 patients who have been followed for 6 months. There will be a blinded assessment on the C-peptide and to see that we are above a certain limit, which means that everything looks good. And in these kinds of large, long trials like the phase 3, it's important to have these kinds of, say, milestones that you are not completely like fumbling in the blind, that you know that, okay, everything's continues to look good, and it's so that will happen in July. And in parallel, I know there are a lot of questions as well in the chat. We are also building up the manufacturing facility here in Sweden, where the primary purpose is really to serve the market with commercial grade drug once we are on the market. And that will also be part of the actual filing. Like I mentioned, there are certain different modules when you send in a marketing application. You have the preclinical data, you have the clinical data, and then you have the manufacturing part. And obviously the facility here in Sweden will be an important part of that manufacturing module when we file. So that's also a big focus, operational focus on that part, where the aim is to have it up and running and GMP certified this year.
Okay, and this interimistic analysis in July, what happens? You could either have a good result or not a good result.
Yeah.
What happens if it's not good?
Well, in the end, it's up to the sponsor to decide what to do. Obviously, we have a lot of data since before and a lot of safety data, so we feel obviously quite comfortable when it comes to this. But it's still important because you can never take anything for granted in this world. So if it would show that we are, like, let's say, below the limit, we will never know how much we would be below or how much we are above the limit. But that's something in the end for the board to decide on. But it could be something that either you continue if you feel that you can continue as normally, or you can make certain changes to feel that do you want to make the trial smaller, shorter, or something like this.
Very hypothetical.
Yes.
And so you said that this fast track could make it like 4 months quicker than usually, and when it comes to this kind of money, it will be a big difference.
Yeah, I mean the biggest, that's on average. So when you file, you send in the file, if it's on average takes around 10 months for the FDA to review a biologics licensing application with priority review, it's on average 6 months. So there's a 4-month gain, and 4 months on market could mean millions and millions. I mean revenues, that's the biggest thing. Every month you are on market is a huge amount of revenue. So that's probably the biggest benefit you can get. Obviously, it's a bit shorter time as well for the company to until positive revenues. So that's the biggest thing is really the commercial aspect.
Thank you. I will raise a few questions from the viewers and also remind you that you can send in your questions. So here is one. Will the recently obtained fast track combined with the interim analysis where C-peptide will be measured will this lead to accelerated approval?
So again, it's important first of all to know that the fast track doesn't mean that the FDA puts fewer expectations or you don't have to show as much. I mean, it's important that the FDA has their efficacy requirements and safety requirements. So it doesn't automatically mean that you can just get away with much less. But when it comes to accelerated approval, that's also it's something that is talked about a lot, and especially FDA has what's called accelerated approval, and it usually means that once you have the clinical data, let's say it doesn't mean that it doesn't check all the boxes, but it's good enough that they say, well, you can get accelerated approval based on this, and then you follow up the patients a longer time and complement the filing to get full approval. So that's usually how accelerated approval is used from an FDA perspective. And again, the most important purpose here is that patients should get access as soon as possible, but obviously that's something that is most likely efficacious and safe, but that they can get the accelerated approval, patients get access to it, you continue to follow up the patients, and then once you've gathered enough data, you get the full approval. So that's definitely with fast track, that's something that could be a possibility. The interim analysis, as I said, it's a blinded interim. We won't know about the efficacy, but again, it's an important milestone that potentially could be used as something like a discussion with the FDA as well around what that interim analysis showed. But the requirements are still, I mean, the same rigorous requirements from the FDA, which is important to know.
Thank you. Another question from a viewer. How strong is the interest from funds and venture capital funds? Is it a goal to have a more diversified and strong shareholder base?
Yeah, and it's definitely a goal. I mean, today we don't have any institutional investors or venture funds. We have a big retail investment base, which is very good, and we are very pleased to have that. But it's definitely our goal to have a more diversified investment base as well. And for example, something like Fast Track is definitely something that is important for any investor, because like we said in the beginning, it does reduce the regulatory risk, which is one of the risks in drug development. And in the end, it's all about the likelihood to succeed. What's the potential upside, and what is the likelihood that you will reach these upsides? And with something like Fast Track or the market research we did earlier this year, or with a collaboration with the JRF, all of these things reduce the risk in the program. But again, today we don't have any institutional investors, but it's definitely on our, let's say, wish list and a goal for us to diversify the investment base.
Another question regarding the Fast Track. The latest drug in the diabetes field to receive a Fast Track designation was Eli Lilly's tirzepatide.
Tirzepatide,
sorry.
Mounjaro, I think it's called, yeah.
So the drug received market approval on November 8th, 2023, just over a year after receiving Fast Track designation. On average, how long does it take from granted Fast Track designation to being on the market?
Well, it completely varies, because you can get Fast Track when you are in early clinical development. You can get Fast Track, like, for example, the Eli Lilly's drug. They got it when they were in phase 3, and the phase 3 trials were ongoing, and I think the readouts, I think it got Fast Track in like November 2022, and then they got approval a year after that. But then the phase 3s were ongoing, and they already had data from one of the phase 3s, and the other was coming in, so they got Fast Track quite late. And it also depends completely on the indication, because some indications you have like a few months of follow-up for the patients. Other indications like we have, it's a 2-year follow-up. So there's no general answer regarding this. The most important thing is that with the Fast Track, that it gives you these certain benefits with more interactions with the FDA, that they really help you design everything in the best possible manner so that patient can get access to this as soon as possible, and then this potential priority review and rolling review.
Thank you. And I have a question for Karin now. Is the goal to enter the market with a partner, and when in time must such a partner be in place, considering market preparatory activities?
So I think partnering or not, obviously that's part of the discussions also at the board, but there's always an interest in finding the right partner if that makes sense. As it's important to understand that even if the clinical trial has not yet, or the phase 3 trial has not yet been completed, you still need to start making market preparations, and that's what many companies that are smaller don't really understand. But what you really want to make sure is that you are ready at the time of potential FDA approval, that you immediately can launch your product, so that there are not unanswered questions with important partners like the payers. If they have not committed, if they have not seen your data, if they haven't had the discussion and not prepared for a new drug, there will be a large delay. That's why I think it's so timely that Diamyd now has already done first set of market research to start understanding what does it look like if you are going to launch a product in the United States. And at the board level, we're discussing obviously what that would look like and what would be the most strategic way to do so. So those discussions are already ongoing, and plans are being made. So Diamyd is in a good shape from that perspective.
And if I understood you correctly during your presentation, you've been involved in this kind of process many times before.
Who have been in the biotech area for the past 25 years. So I've had the privilege of not only developing but launching a large number of products here in the US market and also globally. So I've learned a lot from those experiences, and I'm very pleased that I can share those right now with Diamyd, and also that Diamyd is very receptive to these kind of discussions right now, even if they are obviously primarily focusing on completing the phase 3 trial.
One more question about the production facility. What is the status in receiving the certification and so on?
So again, we haven't publicly gone out with any very specific timelines. What we said, the goal is to have it up and running both with GMP certification and that the large-scale production is in place during this year. What I can say, there's a lot of activity ongoing there. We're really looking at the large-scale production where you will do a number of, they are called first technical batches, and then you go into validation batches, that you start running the large scale, you test that it works, you repeat, show that you can repeatedly do the same kind of work, then you validate everything. And in parallel, you work with the GMP certification where you show that the facility that you have everything in place when it comes to the quality systems and standard operating procedure, and that you work according to these procedures. And that's what sort of goes into the actual GMP certification, that you get the facility certified. And that's then something that the regulatory bodies, both the Swedish one or the European more central one or the FDA, sort of can go in and do inspections to check that you are actually working according to your quality systems. And then you might get some like pointers that here, this is something you need to correct and stuff like that. That's something that I actually also done on the clinical side. GMP is for the manufacturing, and then you have something called GCP, good clinical practice, where you also, when you are in phase 3, you really have to work according to standard operating procedures, and where the regulatory bodies can come in and check that you are actually doing everything. All of this is meant in the end for the patient benefit, that make sure that you are actually developing safe, efficacious drugs, and that what you are developing today will be the same that you then commercialize. And that you manufacture something that you can, every time you manufacture, it's done exactly the same way, that it's safe and it's effective. So that's why all these regulations are in place, and it's probably the most regulated industry in the whole world.
Thank you. That was all my questions, and I can't see any more questions in the chat that we haven't already addressed. So to summarize, if you pretend that I'm an investor, how is your updated pitch now after you received the Fast Track?
Well, the first precision medicine phase 3 ever ongoing in US and Europe with Fast Track designation and Orphan designation, partnership with the largest patient organization in the US, and where we already have market research showing that there's a high willingness to pay a premium price for there's a big interest from both patients and physicians to prescribe and receive this treatment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Karin, for participating from the West Coast in the US.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank everyone that has been watching.